Okay. All right. Well, so this live is about motion and movement, and it's not about, there are others who teach about motion and movement and behavioral aspects of the physical attributes of motion and movement. While that is certainly one of the major elements that you need to look at and understand. I mean, very major elements, and we do cover that in a few classes, but um, it is not the focus of that particular class, whichever one that you are in. Um, but I figured this live talk, and this was actually one of those subject matters that was suggested by Angela, matter of fact. So thought I would go ahead and it's a good subject, and I hope I'm presenting it in a way to make you think differently about motion and movement, yours and the dog's. And so something came to mind a few days ago. Basically, movement is an affirmation of being alive. And in such a an aspect, that affirmation of being alive, if you can move, you're alive. I mean, that's I've said that for probably 50 something years now. Because I've been in places where, yeah, if you weren't moving, you probably were dead. So if I can move, I'm still alive. I'm still after it. And that's really the way that you need to think on the base level about motion and movement. If you can blink your eyes, if you can lift a finger, if you can crawl, if you can do anything, you're still alive and you still have that drive and desire to be alive. So, in context, really, when you think of motion and movement, think of it in terms of that individual's affirmation that they are alive. And that's a celebration of just being alive. And that's the way we ought to approach it when we're working with dogs or humans, frankly, is if we can move um, at all, then that needs to be celebrated. And that's the way we need to think about motion and movement in terms of that affirmation, that celebration of just being alive. And so, you know, in that line of things, what I wanted to do was talk about some aspects of motion and movement from our standpoint with a dog, as well as from the dog's standpoint, looking at it and the way they see motion and movement. And obviously, and motion and movement from a predatory stance is a little different than what we're actually talking about, the motion and movement of the dog and you. Okay, that's an entirely different subject. And so having you know having the ability to move, just bodies in motion, animals move, and so that motion, that movement gives, first of all, intent. um, when you when you are alive and you move, the reason you're moving, the reasons behind why you are moving or what you're doing in that moment, um, basically give away the morphology of the animal, the brain, the body, the capabilities, its speed, its intent, all of those things. And so, when we think of that, the four major subjects that I want to cover is that affirmation of being alive and what that means. Tactical and strategic placement, of course, um, which I've talked about in other subjects, but just in terms of that very narrow subject matter of motion and movement. And then, of course, because of each animal's morphology, us dogs mainly is what we're talking about now, the the movement that we make communicates. So that is a main body of language of communication, our facial recognition. 55% of our communications just in our face alone, much less how we carry ourselves, the stiffness or relaxation or movement, the direction we face, how our eyes move, our hands. Same thing with dogs. And, dogs don't have a written language. They don't have a detailed verbal language like we do, which we've gone over before a little bit, and we certainly do in other courses. Um, so that repetitive element gives away or belies what that animal is indicating in its communication. It's in its intent. So when we think about movement, it's really about verifying the intent of that animal, and that's all in communication. And then, of course, health and movement is the fourth aspect of that. So movement is life. Um, and the contrast between stillness and movement is another element. So that's five, actually. I forgot I put five down. So let's go back to movement in the initial is an affirmation of being alive. And of course, individual movement by itself, to be alive, individual movement is necessary. So the movement of the individual, either the human or the dog, is important. Just to be alive, to be able to celebrate, and to be able to survive. And of course, all intent goes back to survival, as we've covered many, many times on all sorts of levels. But then the next element is movement together. Well, together with who or what? And so that affirmation of being alive, just the celebration of being able to move, celebrating being alive, and moving together, either with predator, prey, or with partnership. So, there have been many studies and very recent ones, as a matter of fact, um, that talk about uh, the purpose and intent of life and the adaptations to stresses, to traumas, to all of those things. Without without those, we wouldn't have adaptation. We wouldn't need cooperation. We wouldn't have all of these things. A very good treatise was recently written about human need for uh, dangerous things, because we don't encounter a lot of danger. We don't have bears attacking us much anymore. Um, or a wolf coming up and killing us, or a tiger, climbing the tree, and a leopard and killing us. So, a lot of the threat, the thrill, the excitatories of what happens in the brain are either self-manufactured now, or they're manufactured for a thrill, a plane ride, or a roller coaster, or any of those types of thrilling things. Why do movies, why are the thrilling movies all, sci-fi or action or things like that? Why are they so addictive to people? Because we lack those things. Now, when you're a dog, we're in a way, they're still living like it's 20,000 years ago. Yes, they've adopted, they've modified their brains with us, and they accept a lot of things that, having lived with us, for 40,000 years, but for the last 10 or 15,000 years within a civilized, quote unquote, we call it civilized, society and urban type situations. Um, Dogs have modified how they think, obviously, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to exist with us. And from that standpoint, their movements of trust and distrust have also modified, but they still look in terms of much like it's 20,000 years ago. And um, we need to look at their movement, their intent behind movement in the same way that they look at the environment. And that's what's going to help you with connection. So the movement together with a dog, uh, specifically human and human, but also dog to dog, it's an important element of, again, the celebration of life, to be together. So to be partners, equal partners in understanding the environment that you live in and the movement through that environment. If there's one thing I could do to change people's minds, it would be to understand how dogs think. And that's what I try to um, get across constantly, to give examples on how they think, not specifically what's in their brain, but how they think and the why behind it. So movement together, but there's also movement in conjunction, and that's slightly different. So in other words, movement together may be you asking a dog to get up on something. You didn't get up on it. That's movement together because you're actually using motion, et cetera, et cetera. But moving in conjunction is an act of you are together with the dog in a way that you're both doing similar things. You're in the act of doing the hunt or the defending or whatever else in those acts. So you take on the role of um, that biological need, that genetic biological need to be a partner in hunt or defense, which is where the thrill, if you will, the actual neurotransmitters that are required and need to, the body needs that to adapt, to learn, and survive. So movement is an integral part of that. And I hope everybody really takes that to heart. There's too much standing around and telling a dog what to do rather than joining it. Um, period. Just is. I don't care what anybody else says. And then you've got oppositional movement. Okay. Now opposition isn't always oppositional, for instance, can be a dance partner. Okay. They're not doing exactly the same thing. They're doing an opposite. So opposition is not always against. There is that element of against versus cooperative oppositions. Okay. So, and you can think of an oppositional movement strategically, tactically, etc., against an opponent, a foe, or a potential threat. And then you can also look at cooperative oppositional movements where, for instance, you are singling out prey or to attack another with your partner in an oppositional response as a cooperative element to, attack one side versus the other, chase them into a bad situation, expose a weakness in the opposite. So, um, movement purposes. What are there's I'll use the word scads. There are scads, thousands of purposes of movement. Uh, Everything from um, vision, hearing, noise, the sniff in the air, the uh, moving from one location to another, moving for environmental reasons, just to get out of the sun. There's literally thousands and thousands of purposes behind movement. So movement in itself is once again, going back to the celebration of life, of being alive, but it's also all about intent. What is the intent in the mind? And if you start looking at movement as the communication of what's going on in the mind, and you start seeing those microseconds of this is about to happen because, and once you start recognizing all of the environmental factors, the thousands of environmental factors that are affecting, for instance, the dog you're working with, you're going to see how they respond to all those stimuli in ways through movement, um, or stillness, which we'll talk about later. And that movement itself, um, is the result of decisions made either in adaptation or in practice. So if it's a novel situation, that's where I will usually step in as a partner and give guidance to the dog. This is what we do when this happens. If you've never run into that before, you're uncertain, I'm going to give you guidance. If I know how you're going to respond, and if I should have been, if I'm around a dog long enough to know how it's going to respond to a stimulus, then I should have already guided that dog when it was a novel situation, maybe not to the dog, but to us together even, as to how we should behave and how we should act. That's the capturing of behaviors, which you guys get into pretty heavily in course 4, or should. And understanding how to capture and guide those behaviors to where you get a an acceptable outcome. Beyond acceptable, you get a natural behavior out of that from the dog, guaranteed virtually every single time. But you have to look at all the other stimuli to make sure that that's correct. And if the dog needs a little help, then that's when that novel element of a stimulus over here, that we've already taken care of all this, but there's a new stimulus over there. That's you. That's on you. That's not on the dog to be aware of that. So why does a dog move a certain way, when it does, how it behaves, et cetera, et cetera? It's because of what's going on in the brain to all the environment, the stimulus itself. You're part of the environment too. And that's where emotions have a lot to do with movement. So uh, I'm kind of going in a circular motion here because this pertains to all 5 of those aspects. You can read a dog before it ever makes a decision if you learn all of these aspects of movement and stimuli and understand how that dog responds to a learned aspect or a novel aspect. And then helping that dog to a quality answer for it and for you, and obviously for the universe that we live in as far as society goes. So it's a quality response, good response that that dog can count on, which begets more trust from you too. So if you're working with a dog in motion and movement, which is the most difficult thing, because you know most people want a dog to sit, stay down, place, wait for me to give you a command, rather than have a total trust of that dog and the dog of you while you're in motions and things going on. That's the higher level of aspects. So I could go on to that for hours, guys. Anyway, so micro scale, you've got micro scale movements and you've got macro scale movements. If you're moving from one area to another, that's a macro scale. If you're moving on a micro scale, it may simply be your eyes. It may simply be the head movement. It may be one paw or one hand or one single finger. Those are micro scale movements. And or an ear moving from this position to that position, just that little bit. Those are micro scale movements, and you've got to learn how to read all of those on a dog. The dog does it for a reason. There's a stimuli, there's a thought process to make that happen, and that's where reading the dog. Now, really, really pays off. If we are constantly telling the dog what to do, you never need to learn how to read a dog. Obviously, people do, and they get better at reading the dog and getting better at telling a dog what to do. Um, and there's nothing. Let me back up. I may have just pissed off a bunch of trainers. I don't care. I just don't care anymore, guys. um, yes, you can ask a dog to do things. You can command it to do things for safety or whatever purpose, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But to have a dog under constant command is not relying on the dog to have um, any trust in you or you trust in it. It's just a command. Okay. So the more that you read the dog and are understanding of what it is, again, micro movements and macro movements, those are decisions. If you don't let the dog make those decisions and you never learn about that dog, um, you simply have a machine under control. And again, probably pissed off some trainers. I don't care. Um, so let's look at survival meanings of movement. Obviously, base level survival. If I have to move out of an area to survive, I will. I will do it at whatever speed. So once again, movement goes back to body position, posture, speed, distance, intent, all of those things. That's their communication. Why is it their communication? It's mostly unconscious or subconscious communication. Everybody reads, the dogs read each other that way, but there's also attempts at direct communication through movement, change, stiffness, all these other things that are layered upon normal survival movements. And the survival meanings of placing yourself behind a tree in a shade, crawling up to either escape or to get on prey, all of those things is about that survival movement. And once again, how we read that and how other dogs read that. And once again, like I say, we're kind of going circular because all of these elements are attached to the five major elements, which are, once again, we go back to tactical and strategic placement. So for survival itself, territorial aspects of placement. If we're in our territory, movements and behaviors are different than if we're outside of our territory. Think about that for a moment. Um, you know, I've given the example a number of times. You're in one Home Depot and then you go in another one. To you, it's the same thing. To the dog, it's an entirely different area. If that dog is used to that one Home Depot, all the smells, sounds, layout, everything else that happens there, even though it's different every time, there's a base level of understanding of that. The position that you park in, the understanding of all the other smells, not just inside or out, but all around that neighborhood, the direction of the wind that it comes from, all of those things. You go to a different Home Depot, you think nothing about it, but the dog knows it's a different territory. It's not our territory. It's new. So the dog is going to behave differently because of that. So its movement is going to give you a clue as to whether how comfortable it is or there's something off. This is one of the reasons that, for me, Bosch is such an important indicator of something's off. He will let me know immediately if something's off, that he smells, senses, sees, doesn't like something. He'll immediately change his behavior. And I've had to grow very aware of all his very minor, uh, major and minor, again, movements, signals, etc. to me. And he's always right. For him, he's always right. I may override it and say, nope, this is okay. Come on, buddy. That's a novel situation that I've given him indicator. This is okay. We've got this. Let's go. So territorial aspects in and out of territory, not so behavior and movement are different in different situations. If you're uncertain about a territory and you're uncertain because you could be in an area where there's a potential threat, you're not going to go strutting through and going and barking at the fence line because it's not your territory and you could be attacked. You don't know what's around the next corner. So that movement, how you move, the stiffness, the wariness, all of those things makes a big difference. Hunting, same thing. So here's let's look at this territorial aspects, both sides of things. Hunting, both um, both in and out of your territory. Defensive, inside and out of your own territory, in your inner den area, denning. Offensive, play, display, and basically an initial and hopefully permanent avoidance of conflict. That's a display. The avoidance itself of areas, the learned versus novel, other dogs, all of those things have to do with tactical and strategic placement, both in and out of the territory, and what we're doing um, during those elements. So those are things that you need to make yourself aware of. We don't think in those terms a lot because we trust every location we put ourselves in most of the time, or we wouldn't go there. But we're putting our dogs in those locations, in those situations. They don't know that how they don't have the knowledge we do of that situation and that it's policed and it's this and it's that. They have no idea. They've got to figure it out on the fly, if you will. And they don't necessarily see the situation in the same way that you do. I see a lot of people, uh, clients, even some trainers, think, oh, my dog's just being stupid or silly or whatever else. Like I said, I've never met a dumb dog in my life, never. Um, so, tactical and strategic placement is one way of moving, and it's in every situation. If a dog in its backyard jumps up for a squirrel in a tree that's 50 feet up, the reason it's jumping up in its territory is saying, this is mine, get out of here. If you're not in that territory, why is the dog jumping at that squirrel in a different territory? Maybe the drive of that dog, its purpose and intent is to hunt squirrels or rats or whatever else. Maybe it sees it as a potential threat. And by that, I mean, it's an unusual situation. It sees movement, and of course, movement itself, that isn't the purpose of this talk, but movement, seeing movement is an entirely different drive in a dog because of the way the eyes are structured and what they're for, frankly, which is to look for movement and silhouette. So, we have a number of aspects, technical as well as simply staying alive. Once again, every question that's ever been asked of me of dogs, why does my dog do X? Why does this dog do this during this situation? Because the dog sees survival that way. That's the base answer. Now, why does it see survival that way? Well, if you don't know all of the aspects of what makes up a dog, how it makes up, and how it all goes together in a huge piece, then you're never going to get those answers. You're gonna get slapdash stuff that you put together that may work um, 90% of the time for that dog or 60% of the dogs, but it doesn't work the other times. So that's where a lot of frustrations come from trainers trying to help people, is not understanding the why and everything about a dog. Um, that's why I just scratch my head why people don't want to study what a dog is. You guys do. I have a lot of respect for you guys, and I appreciate you greatly. So, what is survival to that dog? Well, again, if you can't move, you can't survive, period. So look at it in terms of that. Once again, we talked about territorial aspects of behavior and movement. Out of territory creates a different mindset, hence different movement. Different decisions happen out of your territory than in your territory. Again, shelter is the strongest association with survival for territory, direct territory. And then space, is it open or is it enclosed? Yeah, do you have travel paths of escape? Do you have travel paths to see? Do all of those elements factor into how you move, where you're able to move. Um, and once again, that micro and macro movement potentials, and constantly being aware of your dog, yourself, etc., and how you guys move through every environment is going to help you help that dog, because they are communicating everything internally on the exterior of how they move, where they move, what they're looking at, all of those things. So that's why understanding movement and motion is so important, because that's, I won't say it's everything. It is a major, major element in understanding dogs, period, and their behaviors. And of course, language and usage and communication, then, what's on the inside shows on the outside. Um, there's the aspect of general communication of how this dog simply behaves all the time. In other words, and I don't mean that's a single behavior. What I mean is, in every situation, you can count on this dog behaving in a certain way. So that's a natural communication of how that dog feels about all of these things and the decisions it makes. There's another level where, layered upon that, then they're going to attempt to make communications with either you, a dog, another human, whatever else, and take that to a direct and specific level of motion and movement to give their intent deliberately to communicate to you. And this is where, what is sound to a dog? I've talked about that in other live talks a couple of years ago, I think. The barks, the growls, the yips, all those things. Those are to get attention and somewhat give intent, but it's really to look at my body, look at what I'm saying, quote unquote, because that's their communication. So when a dog growls, unless it's a low utteral gutturance that you're not supposed to hear, or a very high pitched whine right in your ear before it closes its mouth on your arm, uh, those are two different things, two different indicators, and those weren't meant externally. That's an intent of motion, movement, body communication by intent, not by direct attempt to communicate to you or outside of itself. But the louder growl, all of those things, the barks, etc. Hey, look at me! I'm showing you. I'm talking to you through my body, my teeth, my look, my whatever else, my position, my running away, running towards you. So that language and communication, there's those dual uses of communication there. There's, for instance, a practiced stalking. If you're stalking either someone, going around behind, herding, what all of those herding and stalking elements that we've talked about in many classes are uh, of the nature of a predator to get up on its prey or to get a tactical advantage. So there we go back to the category of tactics and strategic uh, movement. Uh, and then internally, the internal languages they're having with themselves, that's the pause. We've talked about the pause a lot, and that's where a lot of the communication happens. That's actually the conversation's in the pause because the action taken afterwards is already the answer. Um, so the fourth area is movement is life, the contrast between stillness and movement. So why are dogs still? There's a number of reasons why they're still. They don't want to be seen, either through fear, uncertainty, doubt, or they don't want to be seen because they are acting in a predatory nature or a defensive nature to, um, once again, to get a tactical advantage in some other way. They don't want to be seen. Why are dogs still otherwise? They could be resting. They could be waiting for another signal from you, from another dog, from an environment, from a stimuli, whatever else it is. They're, they have some intent in questioning. That's a question basically of what's the next piece of information that I do make movement from. So there's, once again, there's hundreds of categories of why are dogs still? Why are you still? And I'm not talking about sleeping, obviously, because even in sleeping, you're still in movement. A lot of you roll, you move, you twitch, you do all sorts of things, and so do dogs. You know, the dream pause that, you know, they're flipping their paws as they're dreaming. Um, and why do they move in certain ways at different times? And that's what we need to be studying is motion and movement are dependent upon all these outside stimulus and what's going on in the brain. So how that brain encounters everything. The dog is telling you all about itself constantly through motion, movement, stillness, the opposite of it, always, everything. We're more practiced to sit and stare at someone for hours at a time as they lecture us or they tell us a business idea or whatever else and not belie our what's inside of our brain at the time. Um, we're more practiced at doing that than dogs are. You know, unless you're a husky staring at someone going, "You idiot," but otherwise, which I got a lot of today from my one of my huskies. Uh, um, and then the gift of understanding how to move with and in conjunction with each other, dog to dog and human to dog. It's a gift of understanding how to move with and in conjunction with each other. Um, so motion and movement, you know, if I were to summarize this, um, if I were to summarize this, is that motion and movement is everything. It's it's the direct result of how that dog and how you see all the stimuli, the environment, where you're at, what your placement is. Do you want to get a quote unquote, I'll call it tactical advantage or strategic advantage by moving even an inch over? You know, to us, a tactical advantage or a strategic, in this case, a strategic, you know, action is if I were like this, I'd want to move to this point. That's strategic. Now you can see me better. My message comes across better than if you were going, what the heck is he doing? And if I'm over here like this all the time and my nose gets out of there and you can't even see my mouth, you're not paying attention to what I'm saying at all. So as a strategic movement and tactically, I want to be sitting upright anyway. I'm going to place myself in this environment this way to get this message across. Okay. So the same thing happens with dogs and their brains. And, you know, us recognizing those elements, even to a little bit, that's how important motion and movement is, not just in the way that dogs move in health and and structure and morphology. That's one element that we do need to look at in a major way and understand. But these other aspects of it, the purpose behind motion and movement, is what we're talking about now. And it is everything. Like I said, it's an affirmation of life. Now, where does this all take us? For those of you who have had, um, course 2, for instance, and have learned all of the uh, categories of things that we can do with dogs in motion and movement as partners, as direct and equal partners in life, in living together, and perimeter walks, and jumping up on things, and going over here, going out our ETJ and studying things and discovering new things and sniffing the air and all of those things. Every bit of that is about motion and movement, which is a natural way to gain the trust of anything. Because if we act alike, if you are around other humans that don't act like you're going to extricate yourself from that situation, aren't you? Because you can't trust their actions and behaviors or what they say or how they say it. So you're going to leave that area. That's survival, guys. So with with a dog, the more you join them in their world, the more you understand the motions, movements, and aspects, and don't act as a disinterested third-party observer. I know I am not doing this subject enough, um, honoring it well enough to cover everything that I want to, because this could be an entire course in itself. It could go for days of the importance of understanding motion movement, not just in studying the dog, but in ourselves and how we act and behave with the dog, how we join with them. I cannot emphasize that enough. I think course 2 begins to do it a little bit of, mostly unbeknownst to you until you go through it. Um, it it strikes you as to, well, how did we get so close to these dogs that we had for 24/7 for 9 days? And the quote unquote unkept but secret thing is we moved together. And we moved together in ways that the dogs inherently understood once you let down your human guard and joined in and became trustworthy. And that's really what it's about, is we should move, we should be in motion and move, not on all fours wagging our tails like a dog, but move in conjunction that we have for the past 40,000 years together as survival partners, and look for opportunities to create that situation where the dog feels a trusted partner in survival. And that's all about motion and movement. And there's hundreds of categories of that you can work. And the more that you do, the better it is. Why do you guys tell your clients to take, go walk your dog and do this and do that? It's not to occupy time. It's to make a connection on a base level, and actually a very deep level at the same time. There's that micro macro, um, with that animal that no other amount of any drills or anything else can get you. You literally, the dogs understand that motion and movement is survival, and that's the way they take it. And so if you never join them in that, actually doing what they do at the same time, or helping them, directing them to those things, and reveling in it, patting them on the back and say, yes, yeah, good boy, good girl. Uh, that's capturing the behaviors. That's That's creating the dog that you have with you, whether it's your dog or someone else's, and it happens quickly. The better you are at recognizing it, doing it, communicating uh, your intent to that dog, the quicker, the more effective that you are at reaching that dog and able to then help it not only just stay in that home, but thrive. So, like I said, I could go on for days on some of these aspects, but I just wanted to get the point across about what motion and movement really is to a dog as well as to us. Because without that, you're dead, literally. If you can't move, you're not alive. And there's not much point in existing as a vegetable, you know. So uh, that was kind of what I wanted to get across. I hope it came across well. I hope it came across understandable. And it's, while this is slightly shorter in time frame from what I normally talk, I wanted to get this point across to you guys, and I actually wanted to leave you with you thinking about this rather than giving you all the answers. So, yes, Angela.
All of our movement is, and I'm speaking from a human perspective, right? Because dogs are constantly observing us 100% of the time. So all of our movement is communicating to them. So we can either be effective with it or not, because that's going to be it. And it is going to be more effective if we're intentional about what we're communicating through our movement, our eye contact, our hand motion, our body directionality, all of those things. We're going to be more effective with communicating with the dog and getting that cooperation versus if we're blah 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 blah, blah just jabberjawing.
Yes.
Um,
Well, the other aspect of that is the emotional side of that. And that's our next talk, as a matter of fact. Good segue. It's the emotional side of humans and how that gets between us and the dog.
ooh.
And so, one of my hundreds of sayings is you have to become what you want the dog to be.
Mhm.
You're the example for the dog of how you want the dog to be. If you're out of control in a situation, if you get emotional or upset in a situation, that dog's going to remember that. It's going to say, oh, something's wrong. If you've got this, I've got this. You can trust me. I've got this. The dog goes, okay, it's safe. It's okay. That's where trust happens. The distrust happens when you have no answers for yourself or the dog. And that's where emotion steps in and destroys any of the aspects during that time. And overall, again, it's the cumulative total of everything that you do with and are around a dog. So the emotional side of human nature. And again, part of motion and movement is being aware of yourself. It's one of the reasons that I highly recommend doing something with your body and brain at the same time. Something, and again, my background heavily in martial arts and sports and things like that, sport or any, cheerleading, yoga, whatever it is that requires a body mind connection that you can truly control your actions, behaviors, the precisions of your movements. Because if you're imprecise, if you're off balance, if you're unaware of your surroundings, that dog isn't going to trust you. Just not. They see all of that. And they also smell, as we've seen. They literally see into you and they smell every emotion, every thought in your head because of the smell of those neurotransmitters and hormones. So it's got to align. We talked about alignment a long time ago and what that means. So all of these things have to align, but motion and movement is just one little tiny aspect of, it's a huge aspect, but it's one little tiny aspect of the whole of, you have to become what you want the dog to be. If you want to be the neurotic mess, stay being human. If you want the dog to be calm and composed, you first. That's what it means.
I resemble that remark.
Don't we all? Hey, I'm including myself. We're all idiot human primates at some point in time, but you got to catch yourself quickly, forgive yourself, and move on. Because dogs recover quickly too. So it's about recovery. And we've talked about recovery time also in many classes. And what does that mean? It's not, that's deep also. There's just so much, guys. There's just so much. I cannot emphasize that enough. If you know more, you do better. Period. So, and that's what this is all about. I shouldn't call these live talks. Every one of these monthly things is a class. It's a course. That's what it is. And that's really what it is. That's what you're paying, is a course. It's a class. So, and thank you for subscribing. We've lost a lot of people out of the subscription. I guess they didn't feel it was valuable to them, and that's too bad. That's why I asked you to begin with before I turned the recording part on, whether this was going in the right direction for you guys, if the subject matters were uh, worth it, et cetera, et cetera. So,
I had the thought about that question. I don't think I've ever hit in that, I appreciate everything that you do. I appreciate these monthly calls and everything. But I worry that asking that question here might get you a little bit of an echo chamber. We all love you. That's why we're here. Um,
you need to get out more then.
but asking on like your CHRI website, doing a poll of that sort of thing of topics that people might be interested in may get you more of the answer that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for.
Oh, okay.
Because there's so many subject matters that, here's the thing. And I'm glad you brought that up, Tiffany, because over the years, people have said, well, why don't you cover this or cover that, or why don't you do it this way? I learn this way and I want it this way. And my answer to a lot of that is, that's not what you need to learn or how you need to learn it. You need to learn how to adapt. You need to learn how to learn a different way, or it's not going to make sense to you. If you want it handed to you on a platter, you don't get the depth of it. So that's one of the conundrums of teaching, frankly, is uh, I know to get from here to here, if you want it given to you the way you've always gotten it, you're going to go from here to here, not over here. And some people don't like that and don't accept that. That's their choice. They're not ready for learning that. They're just not. They want the simpler answer. They want that tool in their toolbox, and I want to explode your toolbox, because you're just stuffing things in something that you already feel comfortable with. You're not learning anything new. You're learning a technique or a tool or do this when this happens type thing, and that limits you rather than gives you a much wider breadth and depth of understanding. My whole purpose is to teach. That's it. That's all I do, is to teach and try to give as much, um, how can I say this? I'm not trying to convince anybody. All I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give you more knowledge, um, more capability, more understanding, a depth of understanding that takes a while to get, guys. And sometimes it's a frustrating path for you and for me. So honestly, and then it's gone. That's how long my frustration lasts. Usually, sometimes longer. So I hope that helps, guys. You know, I don't hold anything back. There's no need. I'm not, I'm not a one man band or or one show, one horse show type thing. There's so much, we could, matter of fact, Angela, we spoke last time we spoke, last week or whenever it was, talked to you a little bit about explanation of quantum mechanics and quantum physics, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So there's a whole universe out there, guys, and don't get focused on just the one little tiny thing. So it's we strive to understand the next thing, but sometimes the next thing doesn't take you the right direction. You want an answer for, and I'm not saying you, you meaning all of us humans. We want the answer for that thing to make our lives easy, but life isn't easy, and that shouldn't be the way. We have to struggle to gain. The struggle, what I call the floundering, is a massive importance to you and everybody else around you, because floundering allows you to study, try things that aren't going to work, try things that sort of work, takes you down an entirely different path. If you didn't flounder, you wouldn't go on that path. You wouldn't experiment with numerous different paths. And to me, that's more important than getting the answer from the guy for that one technique, whatever that is. Okay. So I hope that helps, guys. Didn't mean to get off on that, but that's really what this is about. And the motion movement aspect, I cannot emphasize how important that is for you to flounder, study, and go down that path. That's how important that is, obviously, as a matter of a subject that I felt was necessary for us to talk about. So anyway, with that, I'll bid adieu.
Thank you very much. And actually, can you stay on so we can maybe troubleshoot what's going on with the Zoom
Oh, sure. Okay.
afterwards?
Thank you, guys, and have a
Thank you
good
guys so
evening.
much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thanks,
all of you
Alpha.
greatly.
Tom Kelly's still in the house.
And Tracy's pack scribe is still recording and taking notes.
I did not fall asleep. I am still here. I'm trying to find my get out of here button. I can't escape. Where's the damn?
You can't ever get
I
away.
can't get out.
You
It's
can't
like
ever.
Hotel California.
That's right.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
Yeah. Once you're in the family, you're always in the.
I found.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to get a private conversation here. I think that's going to keep recording as long as we're on. So
Yeah, well, how about this? Let's shut this down and then I'll
okay.
send you a link, okay?
Okay. All right.
All right.
All right. Bye.